Good morning, New Life. How are we? Hey, it's good to see you. If you haven't met me yet, I'm Jeff. I'm our worship pastor here. And man, do I miss Pastor Allen, Miss Kay, a whole bunch. They're watching online, I'm sure. So on the count of three, let's say, come back soon. All right? 1, 2, 3. Come back soon. Soon. We'll see him soon. But if you're joining us for the first time, we are in our series, The Wilderness, where we're talking about different wildernesses throughout the Bible, how they're different lengths, different results, different people in those places. And this week we're going to talk about David. And here's what I know is that wildernesses may not always be of our own doing, but the Lord is always with us in them. They may not be of our own doing, but the Lord is always with us. And last week, Pastor Mike took us through the story of Sarah. Greg helped us look at the life of Moses. Pastor Chad helped us look at the life of Nebuchadnezzar. And Pastor Al kicked off the series with the life of Peter. And this week, we'll take a look at probably my favorite person in the Bible, and that's King David. And I think it's just because he's one of the most viscerally human people in the Bible. We see him mess up and try and fix it and repent and return to Jesus and do great things. And he's a man after God's own heart. That's amazing. I think that's how most of us want to live our lives. But before that, he was a shepherd boy, just out in the field, taking care of sheep, doing his father Jesse's work. And for me, the last few months have kind of felt like a wilderness. I say kind of because they're not really serious, but I'm such a structured person that like minor inconveniences ruin my day and my brain space and throw me off. So for example, I've been doing our young adults life group on Tuesday evenings. So if you're here and you're a young adult, thanks. I love you guys. But we've been going to that group, and it seems that every time I come home from that group, there is something wrong in my apartment. I almost kicked the stand off the platform. So there's almost every time I come home, something wrong in my apartment. So I came home from our young adult group. It's a long day, 12-hour day. I get home, it's 10 o'clock at night, and my AC is not working. We're in Florida. It's like June at this point, and it's 90 degrees in my apartment, and I have a 30-pound miniature golden doodle. She's got lots of fur. So, thankfully, I texted our group chat, and I was like, hey, my AC's out, and one of our young adults, he actually led worship this morning, Randall, love him to death. He, on his way home, stopped and got an air conditioning unit for me and installed it at 11 o'clock at night. These are the types of people you're sitting next to in this church. It's amazing, isn't it? I'm not used to stuff like that. I didn't know how to respond. I was really awkward, but I was very thankful. So then, I'm at a staff meeting, and I just got a sense in my heart. I was like, just go home. So I was like, all right, cool. We wrapped up the staff meeting. I went home. I made some lunch, and I'm working over the sink, and I feel on my hand. I was like, well, I don't have the sink on. This is weird. And I look up, and my ceiling is completely flooded. So that's water just dripping from my ceiling. So I call emergency maintenance. They come out. It takes like a week and a half, and then they leave a tarp in my kitchen for another week because they don't know how to clean up tarps, apparently. So I left it on my front porch, and they got real upset about that. So we get that fixed, and then I go to young adult group. The next week, I come home, and guess what? What do you think happened when I got home? What wasn't working again? Yep, 90 degrees. So here we are, AC broken again, another week. It finally gets fixed. And then this week, I come home from our young adult group. I got my backpack. I got my little gym bag. I got my little dog. We're walking up the stairs. I'm waiting for dinner. I'm so excited. And I go to open my door, and this happens. I'm just not going to the group anymore. Like at this point, I'm done. And so I went to turn the key and just, it's 10:30 at night. I just want to go home, eat my pineapple curry fried rice, and go to bed. I know it's weird, but I promise it tastes so good. Pineapple curry fried rice. And so I call maintenance, and they don't pick up, so I leave a message, and then I sit in my truck, nervous. I'm like freaking out. I'm like, I just want to go home. I just want to go home. I want to be in the comfort of my own place. And the maintenance guy finally shows up, and this man's brilliant idea was to unfurl a key ring and use a pair of cable shears to get the half end of the key out. And if you know anything about that, that didn't work. So he goes, you should probably call a locksmith. And I'm like, that's why I called you. You are maintenance. And so I was like, can we get some needle-nose pliers, some WD-40? What do I got to do here? And so he goes, well, we'll fix it tomorrow. So I'm waiting around. It's noon. They don't come by yet, and I have things to do at night. So I give the front office a call, and lovely Kiosha answers the phone, and she's amazing. And she's like, let me check on that. And I was like, okay, cool. And she goes, oh, okay, Jesus is on his way. And I was like, yeah, I'm aware, girl. Like, I don't. And was I that mean? Like, you gotta. I should be reminding you of that. And she goes, no, that's the maintenance guy. It was not Jesus, I clarified, like his name was, it was just funny to me. And so he came out, I made friends with him, and we got it all sorted out. But these things, like when we lose comfort sometimes, we can just get so disoriented. And it can be so easy to run to comfort in those moments when in reality we should be running to Jesus. And Jesus is funny with me. Like, it just cracked me up in hindsight because it's like 10:30 at night. The only thing I have on my person is my Bible and my dog. So I'm sitting in my truck like, please. And when these moments are stripped away, we realize we find our true comfort in our Lord, in our Jesus. And now these might seem like minimal or minor inconveniences, and they were. Let's be realistic. But the Lord still uses them. And along with these things, we might be walking through major things in our lives. We might be watching people in our lives close to us out of the own stubbornness of their hearts harm themselves and put their lives in danger. And so what I've been learning in these even minor wildernesses is that the Lord knows how to speak to me specifically, and he does so effectively. And I know that Jesus is aware and present in my wilderness, and he was in the same way for David. But what happens when the wilderness we experience isn't our own doing? What if it's not imposed by us? We're being faithful to God, we trust him, we allow him to lead us, but we still experience hardship, pain, and trial. And it seems like someone or something else is causing it. And that's why I want to look at the story of David today. So before we dive fully into that story, I want to look at the framework that Pastor Alec provided us and to look at wildernesses. And he says these 5 things. He says that Jesus is still aware and present in our wilderness. And in this story with David specifically, we see that God had fully equipped David to navigate the wilderness. And he wants to do the same for us. And that the reasons for the wilderness differ. David's wilderness was not self-imposed. Saul, as we'll see in a bit, was the reason for David's wilderness. And that may be the same for us. And to remain patient. David remained patient in his wilderness. He didn't look over the fence. He didn't reach and try to grab the kingship that was rightfully his. He was patient and trusted in the Lord. And that the lengths of the wilderness differ. When we look at David's story, he had about 15 different wildernesses. It's a ton. And then we look at someone else like Moses, who had a 40-year wilderness. And then the results differ. David's wilderness resulted in him becoming king. But God had to teach David how to be king first before he can walk fully in that level of influence. And so for those of you who are unfamiliar with the story of David, let me catch you up. So currently the king of Israel is Saul. Saul disobeys God, and God removes his hand from him. He rejects him. And the Lord says to Samuel, who's a prophet, he says, I regret that I have made Saul king, for he has turned back from following me and has not performed my commandments. He has turned back from following me. And so Samuel tells Saul that the Lord has rejected him. Really fun job. I'm sure Samuel loved that. He's like, hey, King Saul, by the way. And so Saul actually recognizes what he's done once Samuel confronts him. And Saul says this, I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord and your words, Samuel, because I have feared the people and obeyed their voice. So Samuel sets out to find the next person that God has anointed king. And in God's funny way, he doesn't even tell Samuel who it is or where he's going. He just says, go, go. And so Samuel sets off. He obeys the Lord, and he ends up at Jesse's house. And Samuel has a feast with them, and he asks Jesse, he's like, hey, do you got any kids? Like, you got any, like, sons that, you know? And so Jesse's like, yeah, let me bring out, like, my best ones. Here's my oldest son. He's amazing. He's a doctor. He's so cool. And then there's my middle son. He's okay. He's the middle. We know. He's the middle one. And then he goes through all of them. And Samuel rejects all of them. And Samuel says this, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. The Lord looks on the heart. And so Samuel asks, he's like, are you sure you don't have another son out there somewhere? There's got to be one more. You hiding him? You don't like them? He's not your favorite? And so Jesse's like, yeah, I guess we got David. He's out playing with some sheep. I don't know. We can bring him in if we really have to. And so they bring David in. And it says that David was the youngest. He was ruddy, which I had to look that up. He's got like a red face. And he had beautiful eyes, and he was handsome, and his name was David. And it says that Samuel anointed him, and the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. The most unlikely, the most unassuming. It's an amazing God we have, isn't it? That he chooses the unlikely and the unassuming. And what I love about David is when all the other brothers are inside, like, pick me, please, let me be king. David's like, I have my father's business to attend to. I have sheep to take care of. I have business to protect. I'm going to do what the Lord has set before me. I will do what the Lord has set before me. And this characterizes David's life. We see it all through his life. And one of my favorites is, we all know the story of David and Goliath. And when David is literally preparing to go to war, he sneaks out in the morning and still takes care of his father's sheep. I don't know about you, but apparently Goliath was enormous, and if I'm about to fight that guy, I'm not taking care of sheep. I'm doing push-ups. Like, I'm getting ready. But David was faithful. He was faithful. And he stuck to what he knew was right in front of him. And we see it again when he struck down Goliath because he spoke out against God's people, because he spoke out against Israel. David was protective of the things of God. And David rejected Saul's armor when Saul tries to give him the finest armor in all the kingdom. And David's like, I haven't even tested it. Why would I want to use that? I know God's got me. I'm good. And we know how that story ends. And so David's faithfulness to his current calling puts him in positions of influence. And we see it time and time again, that his faithfulness to his current calling put him in positions of influence. And at this time, we see David beats Goliath. He had won favor with the people, and he made a best friend in Saul's own son, Jonathan, which is if you want to learn about friendship, study those guys. It's amazing. So we see this. And then there's people in the streets literally saying, Saul has struck down his thousands and David his 10,000s. How do you think that made Saul feel? Saul's supposed to be the king. He's supposed to be the best. And the supposed influence that he's supposed to have over people is actually upon David, because remember what we read earlier, the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David. And since God had removed his hand from Saul, Saul was tormented by nightmares, and the only thing that could soothe him was, guess who? Our boy David. Love it. I love it. And so this is where we see Saul lash out at David for the first time. It says, the next day a harmful spirit rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I'll pin David to the wall. But David evaded him twice. My dog. And this is where we begin to see the wilderness start to emerge for David. And it's beginning to form out of the insecurity of Saul. So Saul goes as far as to use his own daughters to entrap David. For parents in the room, you would never even consider that. And that's what Saul was trying to do. with David. He was using people, but the Lord protects David. Because David is faithful to what's currently placed in front of him. He didn't even have time for that. He goes, I got the Lord's business to attend to. I can't worry about you. And this brings us to be reminded that Jesus is still aware and present in our wilderness. God was with David in all those moments. Saul tried to entrap him, tried to set him up. The Lord helped David make wise choices to avoid those things. And we finally see David go on the run into a literal and metaphorical wilderness with the help of his best friend, Jonathan. Jonathan protected David and let him know of his father's plans, and David goes to Saul again to help him be soothed from the torment, and then again Saul hurls his spear at him. And at this point, David takes off and escapes to find refuge with Samuel. So here we see that Saul's insecurity and his disobedience to the Lord stands in definite and stark contrast to David, who has confidence in and obedience to the Lord. And at this time, David's completely on the run. He has lost all comfort of his normal life. Remember, he was in charge of armies. He was the man at this time. And he goes from a young man with influence, a commander of armies, to a man with no bread, no food to eat, and running from cave to cave in the wilderness. But God still provides for him and begins to establish him in accordance to his plans. And right in the middle of David's wilderness. So let's take a look at one of these Psalms that David writes in this wilderness time. It's so cool. And it says this is a song of David when he fled from Saul in the cave specifically. So this is Psalm 57. This is what David has to say. He says, "Be merciful to me, O God, be merciful to me. For in you my soul takes refuge. In the shadow of your wings I will take refuge till the storms of destruction pass by. I cry out to God Most High, to God who fulfills his purpose for me. He will send from heaven and save me. He will put to shame him who tramples on me. God will send out his steadfast love and his faithfulness. My soul is in the midst of lions. I lie down amid fiery beasts, the children of man whose teeth are spears and arrows, whose tongues are sharp swords. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. They set a net for my steps. My soul was bowed down. They dug a pit in my way, but they have fallen into it themselves. My heart is steadfast, O God, my heart is steadfast. I'll sing and make melody. Awake my glory, awake, O harp and lyre. I will awake the dawn. I will give thanks to you, O Lord, among the people. I will sing praise to you among the nations, for your steadfast love is great to the heavens, your faithfulness to the clouds. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over the earth." And I love this quote from Eugene Peterson in one of his books where he summarizes this psalm. And he says, "The prayer of David traditionally assigned to this story is Psalm 57. Again, the cave, got it. While there are lines in that psalm that convey David's fugitive state at the time, its overwhelming impression is of energetic and ebullient praise to God. This means that while Saul was the occasion for David being in the wilderness, Saul neither defined nor dominated the wilderness. The wilderness was full of God, not Saul. In the midst of running from Saul, in the middle of his wilderness, David is full of praise to God. He didn't wallow in his sadness, though he certainly could have. He took heart and refuge in the Lord. He gave thanks to the Lord. He talked about how the Lord protects him, how the Lord loves him. Imagine our own wilderness and how it'd be different if we could take a breath and made space for the Lord as David did, if we were obedient and faithful to the things God had specifically placed in front of us. For us, oftentimes the wilderness may not be of our own doing. Saul was the occasion for David's wilderness, but the wilderness was full of what? God, not Saul. Let's see how this particular wilderness ends for David. So Saul finally catches up with David. While he's on the run, David is in a cave in En-Gedi, hiding, and Saul and 3,000 men show up. Knock, knock, David. Morning. And this is in 1 Samuel 24. And he, Saul, came to the sheepfolds by the way. Love it. David's still a shepherd. Love it. Where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Bible said it, not me. Now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave, and the men of David said to him, "Here is the day of which the Lord said to you, Behold, I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it shall seem good to you." Then David arose and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's robe. And afterwards David's heart struck him, because he had cut off a corner of Saul's robe. He said this to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him, seeing as he is the Lord's anointed." So David persuaded his men with these words and did not permit them to attack Saul. And Saul rose up and left the cave and went on his way. David had every opportunity to end Saul right there. The guy who had thrown spears at him multiple times, the guy who tried to entrap David in different ways, and he could have repaid him evil for evil. And now David's still a little snarky, like he just cut off a piece of the robe, and he's like, "I got you. Got you." Which I love about David, it says that his heart was struck immediately, even for doing that. That's powerful. David had confidence and trust in the Lord. He was the exact opposite of King Saul. Where Saul was insecure, deceptive, hurtful, David was secure, truthful, and confident, and compassionate. So here's our personal application. Faithfulness in our wilderness helps us look more like Jesus. The Lord had taught David to be the king he was supposed to be through failure of Saul. David learned exactly who he was not supposed to be by watching Saul. I'll say it again. David learned exactly who he was not supposed to be by watching Saul. He watched Saul squander the kingdom, deceive the people, attempt to murder and destroy those who served him out of his own security and his own weakness. And David refused to be a king like that. And he only learned it because he'd been on the other side of that type of leadership. Let's look at how David confronts Saul. I love this. Then David went out to the cave and called out to Saul, "My lord the king," still addressing him in a formal way, when David already knows what he knows. When Saul looked behind him, David bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. He said to Saul, "Why do you listen when men say David is bent on harming you? This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lay my hand on the Lord, because he is the, capital L, Lord's anointed. See, my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off the corner of your robe, but did not kill you. See that there is nothing in my hand to indicate that I'm guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. I have not wronged you. But you are hunting me down to take my life." And he continues on, he says this, "May the Lord judge between me and you." Imagine if that was our posture. May the Lord judge between me and you. May the Lord avenge me against you, but my hand shall not be against you. As the proverb of the ancients says, out of the wicked comes wickedness. But my hand shall not be against you. After whom has the king of Israel come out? After who do you pursue? After a dead dog? After a flea? May the Lord therefore be judge and give sentence between me and you, and see to it and plead my cause and deliver me from your hands. As soon as David had finished speaking these words to Saul, Saul said this, "Is this your voice, my son, David?" Could you imagine? That had to hurt. Saul was probably crushed in the best way possible. And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. And he said to David, "You are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me good, whereas I repaid you evil. And you have declared this day how you have dealt well with me, and that you did not kill me when the Lord put me into your hands. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him go away safe? So may the Lord reward you with good for what you have done to me this day. And now, behold, I know that you surely shall be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. Swear to me, therefore, by the Lord, that you will not cut off my offspring after me, and that you will not destroy my name out of my father's house." And David swore this to Saul. Then Saul went home, but David and his men went to the stronghold. They still continued on with what the Lord had set before them. He was faithful. So what does it look like for us to steward that wilderness well? How do we have the posture of David in the wilderness? What is God trying to teach you and grow you in during it? And how can we take a breath and understand that we might not be the reason for the wilderness, but that doesn't expunge us from having responsibility to steward it well? About 3 years ago, I started training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And it's been the best and worst thing that I've ever done with my life. For those of you unfamiliar with it, it's the thing in MMA where they go to the ground and everyone starts booing. That's what I do. Yeah. It's one of the things I wish I would have started doing earlier in life. But when you start training, you just get destroyed in every class. It's miserable when you're a white belt. You don't know anything. You have the movement and grace of a newborn baby deer. Everyone knows more than you. And you just hurt when you get home. You're just in pain. You live off ibuprofen and water. It's just miserable. And one of my favorite things about my gym is we have two younger gals there, one 14 and one 16, and they've been training their entire life. They're absolutely animals on the mat. And my favorite thing is we have these, bodybuilder type guys who come in, think they're tough guys, and they want to come in, smash everyone, see red, and I'll walk out with my black belt because I'm so tough. And then they get their back taken and strangled by a 14-year-old girl who weighs about as much as their quadricep. It's amazing. But what I saw, what helped and helped me understand what made these two girls so excellent is they just kept showing up to class. There's nothing super remarkable. They just kept showing up to class. And when you begin to start understanding advantageous positioning and you learn how to defend yourself and you invest more and more time and you learn to begin attacking, part of that is just being faithful to what's right in front of you. And there's this old story in jiu-jitsu where in the belt system there's a white belt, blue belt, purple belt, brown belt, black belt, and it's supposed to be symbolic of all the dirt, blood, sweat, and tears that accumulate on the belt over the years to make the white belt go to black. And so it's always funny to me that it's white to blue belt because you just cry at white belt, so that's why it's the blue belt next. It's so fun. But what they say is that a black belt is just a white belt who kept showing up. Nothing special. Just kept showing up, that they were faithful to what was right in front of them. And for us, in the same way, it begins with being faithful to what is right in front of you, just like David did. We've got to do the same. We have to be faithful to what is in front of us. So here's my challenge. Faithfulness in our wilderness helps us look more like Jesus. And the question to ask us is, what does it look like for you to be faithful of what God has currently placed in front of you? We have a choice. We can be like Saul. We can be insecure. We can blame the wilderness on everyone and everything but ourselves. And we can lash out at others. We can throw spears at others. Or we can take the posture of David and be faithful with what God has placed right in front of us. Not looking around, not looking at what the next thing is for us, but what God has placed right in front of us. To tend the sheep, to not strike down our enemies, to care for our loved ones, to be Jesus to our families, to not lash out at those closest to us. And even this, imagine if Saul invested in David. How is that story different? It changes completely. And I believe that God has something for all of us to learn in our wilderness. I believe that he's shaping us to look more like him. Right? We love we love Romans 8:28, right? For the good of those who love him, right? All things work out. But we forget to read verse 29. Where our good is to look like Jesus, to be conformed to the image of his Son. And I love what John Mark Comer says about following Jesus. And he says, for us, the goal is to be with Jesus, become like him, and do as he did. That's simple. That's simple. Be with Jesus, become like him, and do as he did. To be faithful in our wilderness is to stick closely to the responsibilities God has already placed in our lives. To tend the sheep. Amen? Let me pray that psalm over us. I love Psalm 57. And I think for those of us in wildernesses, it's very helpful. It's a good reminder of who God is to us and how he loves us. Let me pray this over us. Be merciful to me, O God. Be merciful to me. For in you my soul takes refuge. In the shadow of your wings I will take refuge till the storms of destruction pass by. I cry out to God Most High, to God who fulfills his purpose for me. He will send from heaven and save me. He will put to shame him who tramples on me. God will send out steadfast love and his faithfulness. My soul is in the midst of lions. I lie down amid fiery beasts, the children of man whose teeth are spears and arrows, whose tongues are sharp as swords. But be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. They set a net for my steps. My soul was bowed down. They dug a pit in my way, but they have fallen into themselves. My heart is steadfast, O God. My heart is steadfast. I'll sing and make melody. Awake, my glory. Awake, O harp and lyre. I will awake the dawn. I will give thanks to you, O Lord, among the people. I will sing praise to you among the nations, for your steadfast love is great.